everybody. So for chapter 41, we're going to be discussing reptiles. Some of the most popular reptiles that exist today are the lizards, snakes, and turtles. So we'll be talking about many of those types of reptiles, their characteristics, how they came about. We'll also talk a little bit about the history of reptiles, even going back and looking at some of the characteristics of dinosaurs. So when we look at the evolution of reptiles, it looks like reptiles arose from amphibians about 300 million years ago. So when we look back to find, the earliest reptile fossils, the oldest ones we have are around 300 million years old. And when scientists think about why some amphibians might have eventually evolved into reptiles, it looks like there was a lot of food available on land back then, a lot of insects, a lot of food, and the organisms that could spend more time out of the water and more time on land, they were favored by natural selection. So we know, like amphibians, they spend part of their life in water and then they spend part of their life on land. However, they have to stay pretty close to water. A lot of your frogs and salamanders even live part of their adult life in water. They have to go back there to breed and reproduce. So they can't be venturing very far away from water. Reptiles, they have evolved the ability to spend more time away from water. So they could venture away from it. They could spend more time on land. They have different adaptations like scales that help them keep water on the inside, not lose a lot of water. They also have very, very tough skin, and a stronger skeleton. So they were more adapted for spending more time on land. So those are some things that scientists look at when they try to think about, what might have caused some of the amphibians to eventually evolve into reptiles. It's basically the fact that, life was a little bit better on land for those that could adapt to it. There was more food available, more space available. Now, the most famous reptiles that we are familiar with, of course, are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago. And there are a couple hypotheses about how this happened. We can see in this picture on the slide the most famous and most popular hypothesis. And uh, no matter what hypothesis scientists look at, an asteroid impact did have at least something to do with the extinction of the dinosaurs. Some scientists think it might have been one asteroid impact. Some scientists think it might have been multiple asteroid impacts. And some scientists also think that this asteroid impact was combined with different supervolcanic eruptions that happened around this time as well. So lots of things are theorized to happen when the dinosaurs were roaming the Earth that wiped them out. So the asteroid impact hypothesis, when we look at the evidence for it, we do find that there is a giant asteroid crater, meteor crater in the Yucatan Peninsula. When we go to radiometrically date how old this crater is, it turns out that it is about 65 million years old. So there was a very large asteroid, at least one, that hit Earth about 65 million years ago. Also, we find evidence of this asteroid impact all over Earth, because when this asteroid collided with Earth, it spread dust from that asteroid all over Earth. And there is a special type of chemical element called iridium that we only know to exist on certain asteroids. It's not naturally found here on Earth. So when we dig down into the dirt and we go down to about 65 million years ago, we find a very thin layer of iridium. And that shows us that it's very likely that 65 million years ago, that iridium came from that asteroid impact. It came from that huge explosion and was spread across Earth. So those are some of the pieces of evidence that scientists look at to figure out that, oh, an asteroid took out the dinosaurs. Scientists just don't come up with a wild guess and say, oh, we think an asteroid came down about 65 million years ago. There actually is a lot of evidence for this. There's some evidence that other asteroids might have come down, and there's also evidence that volcanic eruptions were happening at the time too. So it was a really, really tough time for the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Now, dinosaurs, they were very, very successful on Earth. Even when that asteroid impact happened, even when they started to go extinct, it didn't happen all in one day. It actually took thousands of years for all of the dinosaurs to die off. A lot of the vegetation had to die off on Earth, and a lot of the dinosaurs starved or they went without water for a long period of time. Some were wiped out in the initial explosion, but it took a long time for the entire classification of dinosaurs, the entire group, to die out. There are three big reasons for the success of dinosaurs. First is that they had legs positioned directly under their body. This allowed them to be fast on land so that they could catch prey. This allowed them to reach up and jump on land as well to get some food from trees, especially some of the dinosaurs that had more vegetarian type diets. They were very adapted to a dry climate. It looks like the climate back then when the dinosaurs were here was a little bit dry. We had one big like supercontinent, so a lot of that supercontinent was a desert. So these dinosaurs were able to adapt and withstand those dry conditions. There was also reduced competition for the dinosaurs. Like I said, there was a lot of insects, a lot of smaller organisms on land for them to eat. And since many dinosaurs grew up to be pretty big, there wasn't as much competition as there would be maybe like in the oceans. So the dinosaurs that lived on land, they did have a good time on Earth for a long period of time. They were the predominant animal species on Earth for a very, very long part of Earth's history. Now, reptiles today have an amniotic egg. Other organisms that also have this type of egg includes birds and some mammals. We're talking about an egg like a chicken egg. It has a membrane on the inside, and then it has a shell on the outside. Your reptiles have this, your birds have this, and actually some mammals, like the platypus, have an amniotic egg with a shell on the outside. But even if mammals don't have eggs with shells on the outside, they still have amniotic eggs. Those are going to be eggs that have a watertight membrane with nutrients contained on the inside for the organism that is growing. Now, some other things about reptiles. They're very well adapted for evaporation loss. Evaporation of body water can be limited by a couple things. On spiders, we find that they have a waxy coating on the outside that stops water from being lost, so they're not dehydrated. In amphibians, we talked about their skin being kind of slimy. That's because they have mucus on their skin that helps prevent water from being lost from their bodies. On reptiles, they're going to have scales, so very, very tough scales, similar to what you'd see on fish, but even tougher and even better at keeping water on the inside. So a couple facts about the little different organ systems that reptiles have. Reptiles, they have lungs for gas exchange. This is different than amphibians. Remember we said frogs and salamanders, they have gills for a while and then they develop lungs. Reptiles, they're going to have lungs throughout their entire life, so they're really well adapted for life on land. The excretory system of reptiles help them conserve water. So when reptiles go to the bathroom, they're not going to be losing very much water. They're going to try to keep as much as they can on the inside of their body. And then reptiles are going to have a four-chambered heart, very similar to the four-chambered heart that we have. A couple of important terms about thermoregulation. This means the ability to regulate your temperature on the inside. Ectothermic organisms, they warm their body by absorbing heat from the surroundings. So reptiles, they are ectothermic. In elementary school, you would have called this cold-blooded. So they don't have the ability to warm up their blood and their inside temperature on their own. They depend on the outside environment. So they seek out heat. So reptiles do this like your snakes and lizards. Fish, they also are going to do this. They're dependent upon the temperature of the water that they are in. And amphibians, they are going to do this as well. They are ectothermic. Endothermic animals, these include things like birds and mammals, like us. So endotherms, they do have the ability to control their body temperature. They have bodies whose metabolism maintains a constant internal temperature. This is why when we go outside in the winter time, if you just went outside with like a t-shirt on and shorts, you wouldn't immediately freeze to death if it was like 30 degrees outside. Your body would keep you warm for a while. Your body has like an internal furnace. Your metabolism's high enough that it helps to keep that body temperature high. Now, there are some advantages and drawbacks to both of these. Ectotherms, the big disadvantage is that they are very dependent upon their environment. They have to seek out heat. If they can't find it, they're going to be in trouble. However, one of the positives to this is that they don't usually have to eat as much because they don't need and they don't burn as much energy. So they're not going to have to seek out maybe as much food as something like an endotherm would. Endotherms, they have the advantage of being able to control their body temperature somewhat, but they're going to have to eat more food, more fuel to run this process. With reproduction, reptiles actually show a couple different ways in which they reproduce. One of the biggest ways is that some reptiles will go through oviparous reproduction. That's where they hatch eggs that are going to be laid outside of the mother's body. So eggs are laid, and then later on they are hatched. So a big example that would be like a turtle. Another type that some reptiles show is ovoviviparous reproduction. That's going to be where the eggs are laid shortly before hatching. So basically, the eggs are going to be hatched almost inside of the organism right before they are let out of the mother. So that's going to be kind of similar to oviparous, but the eggs hatch sort of inside the organism. And then with viparous birth, this is going to be live birth. This is going to be where there's no really hatching of an egg. Some organisms and reptiles will actually show this. So we'll go through some of our orders of reptiles now to give you guys the names of them and then a couple quick characteristics that you guys might have heard of before. The order Colonia, this includes the tortoise and the turtle. So the big difference between, there's a lot of differences, but the biggest thing that we look at is tortoises. They are going to be terrestrial. They spend all of their life on land. The turtles, on the other hand, they're going to spend at least part of their life in water, especially like the sea turtle. They're going to be spending most of their life in water. So that's going to be the big difference between those. Both of these, though, will lay eggs. So I'm sure we're all familiar with sea turtle eggs. Being hatched, a lot of those little baby turtles have to make it from their nest down to the beach into the water. So this order are going to be a type of reptile that lay eggs. We can see that they have a shell. It's important to remember that turtles and tortoises are not like inside their shell temporarily and then can move and get a bigger shell. They actually are attached to their shell with their bones. So if you damage the shell, you damage the turtle. So that's something that definitely important to think about. Next up, we have Order Crocodilia, and this group is going to be based off of their genetics and based off of their anatomy. Scientists think that this is the reptile group that is most closely related to the dinosaurs. When we look back, some of these crocodiles have been here, 200 million years. So, these reptiles in these pictures here, they actually made it through that big mass extinction of the dinosaurs. Remember, these are not dinosaurs. They're sort of in their own group, but some of these groups were around the same time of the dinosaurs. So your crocodiles, alligators, caimans, the gavial, which is shown down in the bottom right with that very, very long snout. These are all members of the order Crocodilia. They all have, similarities. There are some differences between them, such as the snout, their teeth, their size, but they all have that same basic body form, and they are all carnivorous, so they are all going to be meat eaters. Sure, we've seen, videos before of crocodiles, alligators, catching their prey, deer and stuff around watering holes. So they're going to be pretty vicious predators. They're well adapted for catching prey, and they can actually be pretty fast on land. There's some crazy videos out there of reptiles running at pretty high speeds. So these are very well adapted to catch their prey. The lizards and snakes are going to be put in their own order called Squamata. They're in the same order together. So like this Komodo dragon up on top, all of our lizards, our snakes, they actually are included in the same order because they are so similar. We can think of snakes being basically lizards without legs. The big thing that we see with order Squamata is that they have an upper jaw that's loosely jointed to the skull. So this helps the lizards and snakes unhinge their jaws. So a snake and a lizard, they can actually eat and swallow things that are bigger than the size of their head. They can, stretch out their mouth. It's also really elastic. So they can stretch their mouth out around things that are very, very big. You wouldn't think they'd be able to eat, but they have the ability to do that because they like to eat big things and a lot at one time so that they don't have to constantly search for food. They can get a big meal and then they might be good for a week and they won't have to search for something else again. So they have that ability. It's a really good adaptation in this group. So inside that order Squamata, we have the lizards, and the big examples of the lizards that we have are iguanas, chameleons, and geckos. Uh, we can see different types of lizards pictured here. They all have that same body form, pretty slender body, 4 legs, mostly a long, slender tail. But some lizards, like the Komodo dragon, they get so big that they feed on things like goats and deer, and there have actually been attacks on humans. So some of these lizards can get very big and tackle very big prey. Most of our lizards, they're going to be focused on things like insects, other small animals that they can get a hold of, but some of them do get pretty big. Some lizards have the ability of autonomy. This is the ability to detach their tail. So even though lizards are pretty good at catching prey, they also can be prey for other animals. Some things try to eat them. One of the adaptations that some species of lizards have is that if something grabs onto their tail, they can cause a little chemical reaction in their cells that can actually detach their tail, and the organism that's trying to eat it will just get their tail, and the rest of the lizard can scurry away, and they might be able to regrow that tail. So that's a really good adaptation as well. You can give an organism part of you to eat, still survive, and then escape. So snakes are very closely related to lizards. They're in the same order as the lizards. They share that ability to unhinge their jaw and swallow things that are bigger than the size of their head. We can see down in the bottom right picture that snake that looks very, very fat down there. Probably is eating something like a deer or a goat. It was able to swallow because it could unhinge its jaw. Some snakes, they can actually eat things that are too big, and they can end up harming themselves. Obviously, the big characteristic about snakes is that they lack legs. And when scientists look at how snakes evolved, they see that all of today's snakes, a lot of them actually have vestigial hip bones. This means, hip bones that used to be functional in their ancestors. So when we look back at the ancestors of snakes, we do find that they had functioning legs. However, they evolved in areas of very, very thick vegetation. So scientists think that those legs actually were a hindrance. That means it slowed down their movement in that area. So the snake ancestors that had slightly smaller legs, they were able to move through those areas a little bit quicker. So those slightly smaller legs got passed down, those genes got passed down, so that these snake ancestors got smaller and smaller legs over a long period of time. You give this process millions of years, and we get to the place where we are today, where we have, probably thousands of different species of snakes, and all of them are lacking legs because that's something that evolved in that group over a long period of time. So our last order of reptiles is called Rhinoceophalia, easy for me to say. This order contains only one type of organism called the Tuatara, and it lives in New Zealand. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is this organism, why is the Tuatara not included with the lizards and snakes? It looks a lot like a lizard. Well, it's actually not a lizard. Its family tree breaks off a lot earlier than lizards have. These actually are even a little bit older than some of the dinosaurs that lived here. So these have been around a very, very long time, and they have some big basic differences. They're named for this spiny crest that they have on their back. You can see those spines that they have. The Tuatara actually has a third eye up near the top of its head. Now, it's not a fully functioning eye, and it's not the same size as the ones on the side of its head, but it is up towards the top. It senses light. It gets covered by scales early on in its life. There'll be a video I'll be sending you guys. I'll go in a little more detail about this guy. It's very, very interesting. Also, this Tuatara does not have teeth that are in sockets. Sort of like if you think about our teeth and the teeth of most organisms, they're contained in sockets and they grow out of there. This organism's teeth are actually attached directly to its skull. So they grow down from the skull, not in sockets. They're actually connected to the bones of the jaws of these guys. So those are some big differences. They exist only in New Zealand. Their numbers have dropped way down since humans kind of moved into New Zealand and brought with them different types of organisms that might interfere with this Tuatara's feeding habits. So there are some programs underway right now to help this guy, this population of Tuatara come back. But once again, this is not a lizard. This is its own order, kind of very, very special organism that we still have here on Earth.